The arrival. Dr. Charles Whitman was known for his flawless precision in the operating room and his cold, calculating demeanor outside of it. For 30 years, he had built an esteemed career as a cardiovascular surgeon at Westbridge Medical Center. He was the picture of professional success, a polished man in his early 50s, impeccably dressed in pressed white coats, always commanding respect from nurses and colleagues alike. But beneath that exterior lay deeply ingrained prejudices that went unspoken, masked by the prestige of his reputation. It was a typical Monday morning when Dr. Whitman strode through the hospital halls, his steps as methodical as his surgeries. Nurses greeted him with a polite nod, careful not to step out of line. The staff admired his skills, but many sensed something darker lurking behind his mask of professionalism. He was notorious for selectively dismissing patients from marginalized communities, subtly justifying his actions with bureaucratic reasons no one dared to challenge. That day, he had a patient file sitting on his desk when he entered his office, a woman named Alicia Brown. The moment Dr. Whitman skimmed the document, noting the patient's age, race, and lack of private insurance, his mouth tightened into a thin line. "Just another charity case," he muttered under his breath, tossing the file aside. Probably looking for some free treatment. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Dr. Whitman," came the soft voice of his assistant, Mary. "Ms. Brown is here for her consultation." He could sense hesitation in Mary's voice, but that didn't stop him from delivering his usual orders. "I'm unavailable for this one. Tell Dr. Shaw to handle it." "But, sir," Mary began, her voice wavering. "Dr. Shaw is already in surgery, and Ms. Brown's condition is urgent. She's showing signs of preeclampsia. She's 6 months pregnant." Whitman's eyes darkened, and he narrowed them at Mary. "What did I just say?" His tone held an unmistakable finality, and Mary knew better than to argue. "Yes, sir," she whispered, closing the door behind her, her heart heavy. She had seen this before. The minutes passed, and Whitman's mind drifted. He had an important surgery scheduled that afternoon with one of the hospital's major donors, and that required his full focus. A black woman, pregnant and uninsured. Her case was far from his priority. But for Alicia Brown, this moment was everything. Sitting in the hospital's waiting room, her fingers trembled as they rested on her swollen belly. The pain in her abdomen was becoming unbearable, and a deep sense of fear gnawed at her. She'd come to Westbridge Medical because her local clinic didn't have the equipment needed to handle her high-risk pregnancy. "Everything will be fine," she whispered to herself. "It has to be." Alicia's fiancé, Marcus, was outside pacing the parking lot. He was nervous for her, but he didn't want to go inside. Hospitals always made him uneasy. He'd never had good experiences with medical staff, who often treated him with suspicion or indifference because of the color of his skin. He trusted Alicia to handle it, but deep down, he knew that if anything went wrong, the system wouldn't protect them. Inside, Mary returned with grim news. "Dr. Whitman isn't available right now, but we can schedule an appointment with another physician tomorrow," she said softly, trying to maintain professionalism, though she couldn't meet Alicia's eyes. "Tomorrow." Alicia gasped, the pain in her abdomen intensifying. "I can't wait until tomorrow. I need help now." Mary bit her lip. She wanted to help, but her hands were tied. "I'm sorry, Miss Brown. I can try to find another doctor for you, but they're all very busy today." Alicia fought back tears. This wasn't the first time she had been brushed aside. She knew that because she didn't have private insurance and wasn't someone of influence, her care was always delayed. But today, it wasn't just her life on the line. It was her baby's too. As the pain became unbearable, Alicia's training kicked in. For the past 6 years, she had worked as an undercover FBI agent, but now, none of her skills could prevent the medical emergency she was facing. Taking a deep breath, she reached into her bag and pulled out her badge, something she had always kept hidden. The time for subtlety had passed. "Look," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't know if this will make a difference, but I'm Special Agent Alicia Brown with the FBI, and I need medical attention now. If something happens to me or my baby because we were ignored, you will be hearing from the Bureau." The weight of her words hung in the air as Mary's eyes widened. She had never expected this. An FBI agent. I'm sorry. I didn't know," Mary stammered. Let me talk to Dr. Whitman again." With trembling hands, Mary hurried back to Whitman's office, her heart pounding. When she opened the door, the doctor didn't even look up from his computer. "Dr. Whitman, I think you should know something," she began carefully. "The patient, Ms. Brown, she's an FBI agent." That made him pause. Slowly, he looked up, his steely blue eyes meeting Mary's. "An FBI agent," he repeated, the words hanging in the air like a bitter taste in his mouth. "Interesting. Why didn't she say so sooner?" "She just did, sir," Mary said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And she's in severe pain." Dr. Whitman leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he considered his options. His reputation was flawless, and one misstep with a federal agent could spell trouble, even if she was black and poor. Finally, he stood, smoothing out his coat. "Fine," he said coldly. "I'll take a look." When Whitman entered the room, his eyes fell on Alicia, who was still clutching her badge. Her face was etched with pain, but there was a resolve in her gaze that unsettled him. "I hear you're in some discomfort," Whitman said flatly, as though he were speaking to someone with a minor cold. He glanced at her chart, but didn't bother asking any questions. "Let's take a look." Alicia narrowed her eyes, recognizing the dismissive tone. She'd seen this before. This was a man who believed he was above her, above everyone. But she stayed quiet, letting him examine her, knowing this was just the beginning of something bigger. As Whitman began his cursory examination, Alicia's mind raced. This doctor, this arrogant man who thought he could treat people like second-class citizens, was about to be exposed for who he truly was, and Alicia was determined to see it through. When Whitman finished, he removed his gloves and turned to Mary. "Schedule some tests," he said nonchalantly, as though nothing had changed. But something had changed, and both Whitman and Alicia could feel it. In that moment, they each knew that what would unfold in the coming weeks would be a battle neither of them had anticipated. As Alicia left the hospital that day, the weight of her mission pressed down on her. It was no longer just about her health or her babies. It was about exposing a man whose racism had gone unchecked for too long. And she wouldn't rest until justice was served. Behind the white coat. A week had passed since Alicia Brown's confrontation with Dr. Whitman at Westridge Medical Center, and the situation weighed heavily on her mind. Though the physical pain had subsided after she was finally given proper care, the emotional and psychological toll of her encounter with Whitman lingered. Every time she thought about the way he had dismissed her, how he had only bothered to see her when her FBI badge forced his hand, Alicia felt a sharp pang of anger. But this wasn't just about her anymore. She had seen too much throughout her career in the FBI to let it go. If Dr. Whitman had treated her this way, how many others had suffered under his indifference? Alicia knew all too well that not everyone had the means or the authority to demand proper medical care. And that meant hundreds, maybe even thousands, of patients, most of them poor, and many of them people of color, had likely been subjected to the same kind of discriminatory treatment she had experienced. That thought haunted her. Alicia spent the next several days carefully piecing together the events that had transpired. She reviewed her medical records, called the hospital several times to request additional information, and even spoke with a few nurses in confidence. What she learned only deepened her resolve to investigate further. There was a pattern. Dr. Whitman frequently reassigned minority patients or neglected their care, using vague medical jargon to justify his decisions. It wasn't just incompetence, it was deliberate. And that, Alicia realized, was far more dangerous. Back in her office at the Bureau, she sat across from her colleague, Agent Sarah Jameson, a close friend who had been by her side throughout many difficult cases. Today, however, their conversation was not about tracking criminals or uncovering conspiracies. It was about the system, the very institutions meant to protect people, and how they were failing. Sarah leaned forward, her brows knitted in concern. "I still can't believe it, Alicia. Are you sure you want to go after him? I mean, I don't doubt you, but a doctor like Whitman, he's practically untouchable. His reputation, the connections he has. You know how this could end up." Alicia nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. She had thought about this every night since her hospital visit, turning it over in her mind. Dr. Whitman wasn't just a man in a white coat. He was a symbol of something much larger: systemic racism and privilege, hidden beneath the veneer of professionalism. Bringing him down wouldn't just be about proving his misconduct. It would be about challenging the entire structure that allowed him to flourish unchecked. "I know what I'm up against," Alicia said firmly. "But if I don't do something, who will? It's not just about me, Sarah. How many more people are going to walk into that hospital and be treated like second-class citizens? How many people are going to lose their lives because they didn't have the power to make their voices heard?" Sarah sat back, her expression shifting from concern to quiet admiration. "You're right," she said after a pause. "But this is going to be tough. We'll need more than just your story to make a case against him. Do you have any leads?" Alicia had anticipated this. "I'd started gathering evidence, patient records, complaints that were filed and ignored, cases where patients didn't receive the care they needed. It's all there, Sarah. We just have to connect the dots." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Complaints? And they were ignored?" Alicia nodded. "It's not surprising. Someone like Dr. Whitman has enough power to bury anything he doesn't want the world to see. The hospital administration has been complicit too. They've brushed off these complaints, citing workload issues, medical discretion, you name it. It's all excuses." "But you're an FBI agent," Sarah pointed out. "If you file an official report, they won't be able to ignore it anymore." "That's exactly what I'm planning to do," Alicia said. "But I need more. I don't want him slipping through the cracks because we didn't have enough evidence. I've been working on getting in touch with other patients, people who might have experienced the same discrimination but didn't have the resources or the voice to fight back." Sarah let out a long breath. "It's a risk, but I'll help. We'll need to be thorough. Solid evidence, witnesses, people willing to come forward. We can't give him any room to maneuver." Alicia smiled, grateful for Sarah's support. She knew this would be a difficult battle, but with Sarah by her side, she felt more confident. Meanwhile, Dr. Charles Whitman was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. His life continued as it always had. A series of highly respected surgeries, nods of approval from hospital board members, and the never-ending praise of his peers. In his mind, he was untouchable. His long-standing connections with influential figures, politicians, hospital executives, and even the media, had built a wall of protection around him that no one dared challenge. But beneath his carefully cultivated exterior, there were cracks. His marriage, for instance, had fallen apart years ago. His wife, Amelia, had left him when their son, Greg, was just 5 years old. Amelia had grown tired of Whitman's coldness, his obsession with status, and the way he treated people beneath him, including her. She had taken Greg and moved to a small town across the state, where she hoped to raise their son far away from his father's influence. Whitman rarely thought about Amelia anymore. His career was his life now, and he was certain he had made the right choices. People came to him for help, and he decided who was worthy of his time. In his mind, those who complained or challenged him simply didn't understand the reality of the world. Some people were more important than others. That was just a fact. But when Mary entered his office that afternoon, her face pale and anxious, Whitman sensed something was off. "Dr. Whitman, you should see this," she said quietly, holding out a stack of papers. "There's been an influx of complaints about patient treatment. They're targeting you." Whitman's eyes flickered with irritation. "Complaints? From whom?" Those charity cases you keep sending my way. Not just them, Mary said, her voice trembling. There's one from Alicia Brown. You remember her, right? The name sent a chill down Whitman's spine. The FBI agent. He hadn't thought much about her after their initial encounter, assuming the issue had been dealt with once she got the care she demanded. But now, it seemed, she was pushing back, and an FBI agent didn't just file a complaint. They launched investigations. What did she say? Whitman asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mary swallowed hard. She's alleging discrimination, racial bias. She's talking to other patients who had similar experiences. Whitman's jaw clenched. He hadn't anticipated this. Not from her. He had dealt with complaints before, brushed them aside, used his connections to make them disappear. But an investigation from someone with real authority. That was a different matter altogether. Is there anything else I should know? Whitman asked, his voice low and dangerous. Mary nodded, hesitating before continuing. The hospital board has been notified. They're conducting an internal review. It seems it's more serious this time. For the first time in years, Whitman felt a pang of fear. His carefully built reputation was at stake. But he wouldn't let it crumble, not without a fight. I'll take care of it, he said, more to himself than to Mary. I've dealt with worse. But as Mary left his office, Whitman realized this wouldn't be like the other times. Alicia Brown wasn't just any patient. She had the power, the connections, and the determination to bring everything crashing down around him. He sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the city skyline. The fear gnawed at him, but so did the anger. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let someone like her destroy him. But deep down, in a part of his mind he rarely acknowledged, Whitman wondered if this was the beginning of the end. Back in Alicia's apartment, she was making calls, reaching out to people who had filed complaints or had stories about Whitman. Her notebook was filling up with names and details. She was building a case, one that could withstand the scrutiny of the hospital board and the public. She knew Whitman was powerful, but so was she. And this time, he wouldn't escape accountability. As she hung up the phone after another emotional conversation with a former patient, Alicia leaned back in her chair, her hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her determination. We're going to change things, little one, she whispered, feeling the weight of her mission. We're going to make sure people like him never get away with this again. The battle had only just begun. The investigation unfolds. Days turned into weeks as Alicia delved deeper into her investigation. Her evenings were consumed with research, phone calls, and meetings with various individuals who had experienced similar treatment at the hands of Dr. Whitman. Each story she uncovered fueled her resolve, revealing a web of neglect and systemic racism that ran through the hospital's very foundation. One chilly evening, Alicia met with Lena, a former patient who had been treated by Whitman for a serious medical condition. They sat in a small cafe near the Westbridge Medical Center, the warm lighting creating a stark contrast to the somber conversation. I was scared, Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea what was happening to me. Dr. Whitman would rush through my appointments, barely look me in the eye. I thought it was because I was young, but I later realized it was because I was black. Alicia leaned in, her heart aching for Lena. Can you tell me about a specific incident? Lena hesitated, then nodded. I remember going in for a follow-up after my diagnosis. I was in so much pain, but when I explained my symptoms, he just dismissed me. He said I was being dramatic. A few weeks later, I ended up in the ER with a ruptured cyst. I could have died. Alicia jotted down notes, her mind racing. Lena's experience mirrored those of others she had spoken with, each story punctuated by disbelief and frustration. As they talked, she felt the weight of the truth bearing down on her. Dr. Whitman's indifference was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior that left marginalized patients in peril. When their conversation ended, Alicia walked Lena to her car. The night air was crisp, and the stars twinkled overhead. As she turned to say goodbye, Lena took Alicia's hand. A mixture of gratitude and fear etched across her face. "Thank you for doing this," Lena said softly. "I'm scared, but I want to fight back. You're giving me hope." Alicia squeezed her hand. "You're not alone in this. We're going to make sure your voice is heard." Back at her apartment, Alicia compiled the testimony she had gathered, creating a document that detailed the patterns of neglect and bias she had uncovered. She began to strategize, envisioning the next steps she would take to bring her findings to the attention of the FBI. The weight of her unborn child grounded her. She could feel the future depending on her actions. This wasn't just about her career or personal vendetta. It was about dismantling a system that allowed individuals like Whitman to thrive. Just as she was finalizing her notes, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "We need to talk. I have something important." Alicia's heart raced. She quickly grabbed her jacket and headed to Sarah's office, located a few blocks away. The moment she walked in, Sarah looked more serious than usual, her brows furrowed in concentration. "What's going on?" Alicia asked, sensing the urgency. "I spoke with a few contacts in the hospital's HR department," Sarah replied, her voice low. "They mentioned that there have been internal discussions about Dr. Whitman. Complaints are piling up, but the administration is stalling. They don't want a scandal." Alicia crossed her arms. "They're trying to protect him, even after all the evidence piling up." "Exactly, but there's more. I heard whispers of a private meeting happening next week. Some board members and higher-ups will be discussing Whitman's position." Alicia's mind raced. If we could get in there, maybe we could expose this whole thing. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know if it's that simple. These meetings are confidential, and you know how tightly they control information. If they catch wind that we're snooping around, it could jeopardize everything." Alicia thought for a moment. What if we approached this differently? What if we presented ourselves as part of an internal investigation? Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You want to infiltrate the meeting?" "Not infiltrate. Just present our findings as part of an internal review. If we can get them to take this seriously, we might be able to save lives." Sarah hesitated, weighing the risks. "It's dangerous, Alicia. But if we can get access to the meeting, it might be our best chance to bring them down." "I'll reach out to my contacts," Alicia said, determination hardening her resolve. "We have to do this." The following days flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Alicia and Sarah worked tirelessly, assembling the documents, testimonies, and evidence they had collected into a comprehensive report. They carefully crafted an introduction that presented their findings as an urgent call for a thorough investigation into Dr. Whitman's practices. As the day of the board meeting approached, anxiety twisted in Alicia's stomach. They had secured a way into the meeting, thanks to one of Sarah's connections, a sympathetic board member who was concerned about the complaints but too afraid to speak up. He agreed to present their report anonymously, shielding them from immediate scrutiny. On the day of the meeting, Alicia wore a tailored suit that made her feel powerful and professional. She was determined not to show any signs of her internal fears. As she and Sarah walked into the boardroom, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Whitman, seated confidently at the table, surrounded by other doctors and executives. He was laughing, his presence commanding the room, unaware of the storm brewing against him. Alicia and Sarah took their seats, heartbeats echoing in their ears as they awaited the moment their report would be unveiled. The air was thick with tension as the board members exchanged glances, some looking skeptical, while others seemed genuinely concerned. As the meeting commenced, the board chair, a stern woman named Dr. Wilkins, called the room to order. "Today we're addressing some serious allegations regarding patient care under Dr. Whitman. I hope everyone has had a chance to review the findings we received." Alicia held her breath, adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was it, the moment they had prepared for. As the board member who had agreed to present their report stood to speak, Alicia felt a surge of hope. His voice was steady as he outlined the evidence, detailing the complaints and the patterns of neglect that Alicia and Sarah had documented. The room was silent, every eye focused on the speaker. Then the moment came. Dr. Wilkins turned to Dr. Whitman, who had grown noticeably tense. "Dr. Whitman, how do you respond to these allegations?" The room was charged with an energy that felt electric. Whitman's face twisted with irritation, but he quickly masked it with a veneer of confidence. "These claims are unfounded and exaggerated. My patients receive the best care possible. If there are issues, they can be addressed through proper channels without resorting to such public attacks on my character." "But Dr. Whitman," the board member interjected, "the complaints are from patients who felt dismissed, ignored, and in some cases, misdiagnosed. We need to take this seriously." Whitman's composure began to crack. "It's easy for people to blame their doctors when they don't understand their own health issues. I cannot be held responsible for every unhappy patient." Alicia could feel her heart racing, every word he spoke fueling her anger. How could he dismiss their suffering so easily? Dr. Wilkins looked at him intently. "It's important to understand that the perception of care is just as crucial as the care itself. We have a responsibility to ensure every patient feels heard and valued." Alicia glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. This was a pivotal moment. They needed to speak up. With her heart pounding, Alicia raised her hand, feeling a wave of courage wash over her. Dr. Wilkins noticed her. "Yes, you have something to add." Alicia stood, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I'm Agent Alicia Brown, and I've been investigating these claims. I have first-hand accounts from multiple patients who experienced discrimination and neglect under Dr. Whitman's care. They deserve a voice." A murmur swept through the room as all eyes turned to her. She felt exposed, but the urgency of her mission pushed her forward. Dr. Whitman's actions are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger systemic issue that has been ignored for far too long. It's time for accountability and change. Whitman's eyes narrowed as he glared at her, but Alicia held her ground. She could feel the power of the truth radiating around her, and she refused to back down. Dr. Wilkins regarded Alicia thoughtfully. "Thank you for your courage, Agent Brown. We take these matters very seriously. We will ensure that a full investigation is conducted." Alicia's heart soared. This was just the beginning, but it felt monumental. Change was on the horizon, and she had played a part in igniting it. As the meeting continued, Alicia felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about Whitman anymore. It was about the patients who had suffered in silence, and the fight for justice they all so desperately needed. The board adjourned, and as the members began to exit, Alicia and Sarah exchanged a triumphant glance. They had done it. But as Alicia turned to leave, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Dr. Whitman, his expression dark and threatening. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice low and cold. "You think this is over. You've made a powerful enemy today." Alicia met his gaze, unflinching. "And you've made a mistake. You can't silence me, Dr. Whitman. You'll be held accountable for your actions." With that, she walked away, heart pounding but empowered. The fight was far from over, but now she was ready to face whatever came next. She had allies, she had evidence, and she had the truth on her side. As she stepped out of the boardroom and into the bustling hallway, Alicia knew that this was only the beginning of a battle that would define not just her career, but also the lives of countless patients. And she was determined to see it through to the end. Shadows of retribution. The aftermath of the board meeting reverberated through Westbridge Medical Center like ripples in a pond. Whispers filled the corridors, some laced with disbelief while others dripped with fear. Alicia sensed a palpable tension as she navigated through the bustling hospital, her every step met with sidelong glances and hushed conversations. Days turned into a blur of phone calls, meetings, and late nights and drafting detailed reports. Alicia and Sarah worked tirelessly to document the growing number of complaints against Dr. Whitman. With each account, They uncovered deeper layers of negligence and bias, exposing a medical culture that prioritized reputation over patient care. But as they pressed on, a sense of unease settled over Alicia. Dr. Whitman's chilling warning echoed in her mind. You've made a powerful enemy. One evening, Alicia sat in her small home office, surrounded by piles of documents and empty coffee cups. The soft glow of her desk lamp illuminated her face as she pored over the latest testimonies. Each narrative was heartbreaking, recounting experiences of being disregarded, misdiagnosed, or flat-out ignored. A sudden knock on her door jolted her from her thoughts. Glancing at the clock, she noticed it was late. Heart racing, she approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. To her relief, she recognized Sarah's silhouette. "Hey, sorry to drop by so late," Sarah said, her voice strained. "I just needed to talk to you about something important." "Come in," Alicia replied, stepping aside to let her friend in. "What's going on?" Once inside, Sarah closed the door behind her, her expression serious. "I just got off the phone with a source inside the hospital. Word is that Dr. Whitman is pulling strings to protect himself. He's reaching out to board members, trying to discredit our findings." Alicia's heart sank. "What do you mean? How can he do that?" "He's leveraging his relationships with some powerful people in the medical community. If he can cast doubt on our evidence, he might be able to escape scrutiny," Sarah explained. "We have to act quickly before he can turn this against us." Alicia rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We need to gather more evidence, something irrefutable. Maybe we can find more witnesses who are willing to speak out." Sarah nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. "I already have a few leads. There are some former employees who might be willing to share their experiences. Let's reach out to them," Alicia said, her resolve hardening. "We can't let him intimidate us. We have to show them that the truth is stronger than his connections." As the days passed, Alicia and Sarah worked relentlessly, contacting former employees, gathering additional testimonies, and reaching out to patient advocacy groups. The growing network of support began to feel like a lifeline, a collective force rising against the oppressive culture of silence that Dr. Whitman had fostered. One afternoon, as they sifted through the piles of documentation, Alicia received an unexpected phone call. It was Lena, the former patient who had shared her harrowing experience with Dr. Whitman. "Alicia, I need to talk to you," Lena said, her voice trembling. "I've been getting strange calls, and I feel like someone is watching me." Alicia's stomach knotted. "What do you mean? What kind of calls?" "People asking about my treatment, about you and Sarah. It's really unsettling," Lena replied. "And today, when I was leaving the grocery store, I saw a man standing outside. He just stared at me. I've never felt so scared." "Lena, you need to be careful." "I'll come over," Alicia said, her heart racing. "You're not alone in this. I'll make sure you're safe." Alicia arrived at Lena's apartment within minutes, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. As she knocked on the door, she glanced around the dimly lit parking lot, her instincts on high alert. The world felt different now, threatening, as if shadows lurked just out of sight. When Lena opened the door, her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Thank you for coming." "Of course. Let's talk inside," Alicia said, ushering Lena into her living room, where they settled on the couch. "What else has been happening?" Lena took a deep breath, visibly shaken. "It's just been a lot. I feel like they're trying to intimidate me into staying quiet. I'm scared, Alicia. I don't want to be part of this if it means putting myself in danger." Alicia took Lena's hands in hers, squeezing them gently. "You're incredibly brave for speaking out, but I understand your fear. We can find a way to protect you. I'll make sure you have support, and we can take steps to document everything that's happening. I just want to be safe," Lena murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. "I promise we'll get through this together," Alicia said, her heart swelling with determination. "You deserve to be heard, and we'll fight for that." After their conversation, Alicia and Lena crafted a plan to document any future incidents and establish a support network to keep Lena safe. They also reached out to local advocacy groups that could provide resources and assistance to victims of medical negligence and discrimination. But as Alicia delved deeper into her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time she stepped outside, she scanned the surroundings, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The fear had become a constant companion, intertwining with her resolve. One evening, as Alicia and Sarah met at a cafe to review their findings, the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. "I feel like we're on the verge of something big," Sarah said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But I can't shake this feeling that we're being targeted." "I know what you mean," Alicia replied, glancing around the cafe. "It's like Whitman has eyes everywhere. We need to stay vigilant." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion outside. Alicia and Sarah exchanged worried glances, and without hesitation, they stepped out onto the sidewalk. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in agitation. In the center of the crowd stood a group of protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for Patients," and "End Medical Discrimination." The sight filled Alicia with a mixture of hope and dread. "This could be the break we need," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. "If we can connect with these activists, we might have a larger platform for our findings." As they approached the protest, Alicia spotted a familiar face. Lena, standing among the crowd, her expression fierce and determined. "Lena," Alicia called out, pushing through the throngs of people to reach her. When Lena saw them, her face broke into a wide smile. "Alicia, Sarah, I'm so glad you're here." "We didn't know you'd be out here," Sarah said, her tone warm. "This is amazing." "I had to do something," Lena said, her voice strong. "I can't let fear control me anymore. We need to stand up against this together." Alicia's heart swelled with pride. "You're inspiring, Lena. This is exactly what we need, unity and visibility. We're not alone in this fight." As the protest continued, Alicia took a moment to look around. The energy was palpable, a collective cry for justice echoing in the air. It was a reminder that while they were facing powerful opposition, they also had the strength of the community behind them. In the days that followed, the protests sparked media coverage and drew attention to the issues plaguing Westbridge Medical Center. Alicia, Sarah, and Lena worked tirelessly, engaging with journalists and patient advocacy groups, amplifying the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. But amid the growing momentum, Alicia remained acutely aware of the dangers they faced. With each step forward, it felt as if Dr. Whitman was lurking just out of sight, plotting his retaliation. One evening, as Alicia sat at her desk reviewing emails from concerned patients and families, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "We need to meet. Urgent." Alicia's heart raced as she quickly gathered her things and headed out. She arrived at their usual cafe, finding Sarah already seated at a corner table, her expression tense. "What's wrong?" Alicia asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "I've been hearing things," Sarah said, her voice low. "Rumors are circulating that Dr. Whitman is planning to take legal action against us. He's framing it as a smear campaign." Alicia's stomach dropped. "He can't do that. We have the evidence." "Exactly, but he's trying to discredit us before we can even present it," Sarah interrupted, her frustration palpable. "If he can paint us as activists with an agenda, it might undermine everything we've built." Alicia clenched her fists, anger boiling inside her. "We can't let him do this. We need to expose him for what he really is." "I agree, but we have to be smart about it," Sarah cautioned. "We need to gather more evidence and perhaps even consider legal counsel ourselves. We have to be prepared for the battle he's gearing up for." "I'll reach out to some lawyers I know in the area," Alicia said, determination surging within her. "We can't back down now. We've come too far, and too many people are counting on us." As the days turned into weeks, Alicia and Sarah worked relentlessly, fortified by the support of the community and their growing network of allies. But Dr. Whitman's shadow loomed larger than ever, a constant reminder of the battle they faced. One fateful evening, as Alicia prepared to leave the hospital after a long shift, she noticed a figure lingering in the parking lot. Her heart raced as she recognized the man from Lena's description. He was watching her, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Hey, what do you want?" Alicia called out, her voice trembling but defiant. The man took a step closer, his demeanor menacing. "Just delivering a message, sweetheart. You think you can take down someone like Dr. Whitman? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Alicia's pulse quickened, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I won't be intimidated by you or your boss. I know the truth, and I'm going to make sure it comes to light." The man's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "You really think you're safe? There are consequences for your actions. You should be careful who you cross." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alicia breathless, her resolve hardening. She knew the stakes were rising, but she also understood that fear could not dictate her actions. That night, as she lay in bed, Alicia's mind raced with the events of the day. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also the unwavering support of her friends and allies. The battle ahead would be fierce, but it was one she was determined to fight. In the center of the crowd stood a group of protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for patients," and "End medical discrimination." The sight filled Alicia with a mixture of hope and dread. "This could be the break we need," Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. "If we can connect with these activists, we might have a larger platform for our findings." As they approached the protest, Alicia spotted a familiar face, Lena, standing among the crowd, her expression fierce and determined. "Lena," Alicia called out, pushing through the throngs of people to reach her. When Lena saw them, her face broke into a wide smile. "Alicia, Sarah, I'm so glad you're here. We didn't know you'd be out here," Sarah said, her tone warm. "This is amazing." "I had to do something," Lena said, her voice strong. "I can't let fear control me anymore. We need to stand up against this together." Alicia's heart swelled with pride. "You're inspiring, Lena. This is exactly what we need. Unity and visibility. We're not alone in this fight." As the protest continued, Alicia took a moment to look around. The energy was palpable, a collective cry for justice echoing in the air. It was a reminder that while they were facing powerful opposition, they also had the strength of the community behind them. In the days that followed, the protest sparked media coverage and drew attention to the issues plaguing Westbridge Medical Center. Alicia, Sarah, and Lena worked tirelessly, engaging with journalists and patient advocacy groups, amplifying the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. But amid the growing momentum, Alicia remained acutely aware of the dangers they faced. With each step forward, it felt as if Dr. Whitman was lurking just out of sight, plotting his retaliation. One evening, as Alicia sat at her desk reviewing emails from concerned patients and families, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "We need to meet. Urgent." Alicia's heart raced as she quickly gathered her things and headed out. She arrived at their usual cafe, finding Sarah already seated at a corner table, her expression tense. "What's wrong?" Alicia asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "I've been hearing things," Sarah said, her voice low. "Rumors are circulating that Dr. Whitman is planning to take legal action against us. He's framing it as a smear campaign." Alicia's stomach dropped. "He can't do that. We have the evidence." "Exactly, but he's trying to discredit us before we can even present it," Sarah interrupted, her frustration palpable. "If he can paint us as activists with an agenda, it might undermine everything we've built." Alicia clenched her fists, anger boiling inside her. "We can't let him do this. We need to expose him for what he really is." "I agree, but we have to be smart about it," Sarah cautioned. "We need to gather more evidence and perhaps even consider legal counsel ourselves. We have to be prepared for the battle he's gearing up for. I'll reach out to some lawyers I know in the area, Alicia said, determination surging within her. We can't back down now. We've come too far, and too many people are counting on us. As the days turned into weeks, Alicia and Sarah worked relentlessly, fortified by the support of the community and their growing network of allies. But Dr. Whitman's shadow loomed larger than ever, a constant reminder of the battle they faced. One fateful evening, as Alicia prepared to leave the hospital after a long shift, she noticed a figure lingering in the parking lot. Her heart raced as she recognized the man from Lena's description. He was watching her, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Hey, what do you want?" Alicia called out, her voice trembling but defiant. The man took a step closer, his demeanor menacing. "Just delivering a message, sweetheart. You think you can take down someone like Dr. Whitman? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Alicia's pulse quickened, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I won't be intimidated by you or your boss. I know the truth, and I'm going to make sure it comes to light." The man's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "You really think you're safe? There are consequences for your actions. You should be careful who you cross." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alicia breathless, her resolve hardening. She knew the stakes were rising, but she also understood that fear could not dictate her actions. That night, as she lay in bed, Alicia's mind raced with the events of the day. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also the unwavering support of her friends and allies. The battle ahead would be fierce, but it was one she was determined to fight. In the quiet hours of the night, she formulated a plan. She would gather her allies, fortify their evidence, and prepare to confront Dr. Whitman and his tactics head-on. Together, they would be an unstoppable force, united in their fight for justice. With renewed determination, Alicia drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of a future where truth prevailed and justice was served. Little did she know, the coming days would test her resolve in ways she never imagined, pushing her to confront not just the darkness of the medical system, but also the shadows lurking within herself. The rising tide. As dawn broke over the city, the sunlight poured through Alicia's window, illuminating her small apartment. She rubbed her eyes and took a moment to gather her thoughts. The conversation with the man in the parking lot lingered in her mind, a grim reminder of the stakes involved. Today was the day they would take their fight to the next level, and Alicia felt both a thrill and an overwhelming weight of responsibility. With determination, she dressed quickly, her mind racing through the details of their plan. The meeting with the community advocacy group was crucial. It could amplify their voices and bring further attention to the injustices at Westbridge Medical Center. Alicia grabbed her notebook, filled with testimonies and evidence, and headed out the door, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. Arriving at the meeting hall, Alicia was struck by the sense of urgency that permeated the air. People were already gathered, chatting animatedly as they set up chairs and arranged banners. She spotted Sarah across the room, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. "There you are. I was starting to worry," Sarah said as she approached. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," Alicia replied, a determined smile breaking through her anxiety. "We've come too far to turn back now. Let's make our voices heard." As the meeting began, Alicia felt a surge of energy wash over her. The room filled with passionate advocates, patients, and families affected by the same systemic issues they were fighting against. Stories of negligence, discrimination, and harm echoed through the hall, each one more heartbreaking than the last. With every testimony shared, Alicia's conviction grew stronger. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had been silenced. The group discussed strategies, ways to raise awareness, and avenues for legal action. Alicia listened intently, jotting down notes, ready to contribute when the moment was right. It felt as if the community was coming together like a rising tide, ready to sweep away the injustices that had festered for far too long. "Now let's hear from Alicia and Sarah," the facilitator said, gesturing for them to come forward. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to them. Taking a deep breath, Alicia stepped to the front, Sarah at her side. "Thank you for gathering here today," Alicia began, her voice steady. "We stand before you not just as individuals, but as representatives of a movement that seeks to hold accountable those who have abused their power in the medical system." Sarah continued, sharing their experiences with Dr. Whitman and the myriad complaints they had gathered. "We are here to shed light on the systemic issues at Westbridge Medical Center. Together, we can create change, not just for ourselves, but for every patient who has ever been wronged." Applause erupted as they finished, a chorus of support that reverberated in the room. Encouraged by the response, Alicia and Sarah exchanged glances, both aware of the significance of this moment. After the meeting, a woman approached them, her eyes bright with fervor. "I'm Elena, and I have been a nurse at Westbridge for over 10 years. I've seen things that would make your skin crawl. I want to help you." "Thank you," Alicia exclaimed, her heart racing. "We need all the help we can get. Your perspective could be invaluable." Elena nodded, her expression serious. "I have evidence, documentation of misconduct and negligence that I've kept hidden, afraid of the consequences. But it's time to stand up. I'm ready to share what I know." Alicia felt a rush of hope. "This could be a turning point for us. Let's connect and make a plan to present this information together." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The advocacy group had gained momentum, and support from various community organizations began pouring in. With Elena's help, they compiled a comprehensive report outlining the extensive evidence against Dr. Whitman. Each revelation peeled back layers of corruption, illustrating the dangerous practices that had endangered countless patients. As they prepared for a press conference to unveil their findings, Alicia's apprehension returned. The magnitude of what they were about to do weighed heavily on her. She understood that exposing Dr. Whitman would undoubtedly provoke retaliation, and she couldn't shake the ominous feeling that their safety was at risk. One evening, as Alicia worked late at the hospital, she received a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. Urgent." Alicia's stomach twisted as she read the text. She hurriedly finished her shift and drove to Sarah's apartment, her mind racing with possibilities. What could have happened? When she arrived, Sarah greeted her at the door, her expression a mix of fear and urgency. "You need to see this," she said, leading Alicia to the living room where her laptop was open. On the screen was a news article featuring a headline that sent chills down Alicia's spine. "Whistleblower nurse claims misconduct at Westbridge Medical Center." The article detailed a nurse's accusations against Dr. Whitman, including allegations of bullying and neglect. But the tone was alarmingly slanted, painting the nurse as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. "What the hell?" Alicia exclaimed, reading through the piece. "This is a smear campaign. They're trying to undermine us before we even get started." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We need to act quickly. We can't let this stand. We have to gather our own evidence and counter this narrative before it gains traction." Alicia felt a surge of adrenaline. "We have to mobilize our supporters. If we can get them to share their experiences publicly, we might be able to turn this around." "Exactly," Sarah said, her resolve strengthening. "Let's set up a meeting with the advocacy group and strategize our next steps." The following days were a flurry of activity as Alicia and Sarah worked tirelessly to rally support. They organized a gathering with community members, inviting everyone who had been impacted by Dr. Whitman's practices to share their stories. The room was filled with emotion as voices rose and fell in a chorus of shared pain and resilience. Alicia stood at the front, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the surge of power that came from unity. "Together, we can stand against this. We are not alone in this fight. Our stories matter, and we will not be silenced." The meeting culminated in a powerful decision. They would host a press conference to reveal their findings and share the personal testimonies of those affected. The media had already begun to pay attention, and this was their chance to reclaim the narrative. As the date of the press conference approached, Alicia found herself consumed by anxiety. Every time she closed her eyes, she envisioned Dr. Whitman's cold smile, the man lurking in the shadows. She felt exposed, as if their adversary was waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as she lay in bed, Alicia decided to call Lena. It was important to have her support, especially now that they were gearing up for such a critical moment. "Hey, Alicia," Lena answered, her voice soothing. "What's going on?" "I just wanted to check in. We're hosting a press conference soon, and I need to know you're still with us." "This fight is bigger than we imagined," Alicia said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I'm here, I promise," Lena replied. "I've been working on my own story. I want to speak out too. No more hiding." Alicia felt a rush of gratitude. "You're incredibly brave, Lena. Your voice will make a difference. We need everyone to share their experiences. Just promise me we'll be safe," Lena said, her tone serious. Alicia hesitated, but she could not let fear dictate their actions. "We'll be careful. I won't let anything happen to you or anyone else. We're in this together." On the day of the press conference, the atmosphere was electric. A sense of anticipation buzzed in the air as reporters set up their cameras and community members gathered to stand in solidarity. Alicia felt a mix of nerves and determination as she stepped to the podium, flanked by Sarah and Alina. "Thank you for being here," Alicia began, her voice steady. "Today, we stand united against the culture of fear and silence that has allowed medical professionals to abuse their power. We are here to share the truth, and we will not be silenced any longer." As she spoke, Alicia saw the faces of the crowd. Some were filled with hope, while others reflected the pain of their past experiences. With each testimony shared, the weight of their collective suffering became a call to action. When Lena's turn came, she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly but her voice resolute. "I was a patient at Westbridge, and I was mistreated. My concerns were ignored, and I was made to feel small. But I am here today to tell my story and demand accountability." Applause erupted as Lena finished, a wave of support washing over her. Alicia felt a rush of pride. This was the power of unity, the strength that comes when voices are raised together. As the press conference concluded, Alicia felt a surge of hope. They had taken a significant step forward, and the momentum was building. But in the back of her mind, a nagging doubt lingered. Dr. Whitman wouldn't take this lightly. She could feel his presence lurking just out of sight. That night, Alicia and Sarah sat at a diner, celebrating their hard work over cups of coffee. "We did it," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. The press conference was a huge success. "The story is gaining traction." "I know, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over," Alicia said, stirring her coffee absently. "Dr. Whitman is going to come after us harder than ever." Sarah sighed, her expression thoughtful. "You're probably right, but we've made it this far. We're stronger together, and we got the truth on our side." Alicia nodded, trying to push the fear aside. For now, they had won a small victory, but she knew the fight was far from over. The tide had risen, but the storm was still brewing. Shadows of retaliation. The euphoria from the press conference didn't last long. Within days, Alicia felt the growing weight of the backlash. It began with whispers of the hospital, the subtle stares from colleagues who had once been allies, and the sudden shift in attitude from her supervisors. She could feel the tension building, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting to strike. One afternoon, as she walked down the familiar halls of Westbridge Medical Center, a patient's chart clutched in her hands, Alicia noticed Dr. Whitman standing at the nurse's station. His usual smug demeanor was gone, replaced by something more dangerous, calculated, simmering anger. Their eyes locked briefly, and Alicia felt a shiver run down her spine. He didn't say anything, but the cold, piercing look he gave her was more than enough. She knew what it meant. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, as Alicia sat at her small kitchen table, her phone buzzed with a series of text messages. It was Sarah. "Sarah, we need to meet. Now." Alicia's stomach tightened. The urgency in Sarah's message was unsettling. Without replying, she grabbed her keys and headed out, her mind racing through the possibilities of what could have happened. Had Dr. Whitman already started his retaliation? Was someone hurt? Sarah was pacing outside the cafe when Alicia arrived, her face pale and drawn. She waved Alicia over, her movements jittery, and without a word, they slipped into a quiet corner booth. "What's going on?" Alicia asked, her heart pounding as she sat down. Sarah leaned in, her voice hushed. "I've been getting threatening messages, anonymous, but I know it's from someone connected to Whitman. They're telling me to back off, that if we keep pushing this, we'll regret it." Alicia felt her breath catch. She had anticipated some kind of pushback, but this was personal. "Did you report it? We can't let them intimidate us." Sarah nodded. "I filed a report with the police, but you know how these things go. They took down the information, but they didn't seem too concerned. They told me to be careful." Alicia clenched her fists under the table. "This is exactly what we feared, but we can't let them scare us into silence. We've come too far." "I know," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "But it's not just the messages. I've been followed, Alicia. Someone's watching me." Alicia's pulse quickened. "Followed? Are you sure?" Sarah nodded grimly. "I saw the same car parked outside my apartment 2 nights in a row. And then today, after work, it followed me for blocks. I couldn't shake it. I finally ducked into a crowded grocery store, and that's when they drove off." Alicia felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about Dr. Whitman's medical malpractice anymore. It was about power, about silencing them through fear and intimidation. "We need to be careful, but we also need to stay visible. If we retreat into the shadows, we're playing right into their hands." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't want to back down, but we're in danger, Alicia. What if something happens to us?" Alicia leaned forward, her voice firm. "We'll take precautions. We'll make sure we're never alone, and we'll keep the media involved. The more eyes on us, the harder it'll be for them to make a move." Sarah nodded, though doubt still flickered in her eyes. "Okay, but let's stay vigilant. This is getting serious." Over the next few days, the threats intensified. Alicia started receiving strange calls in the middle of the night, calls that would disconnect as soon as she answered. The subtle harassment at the hospital grew more pronounced as well. Several of her shifts were abruptly reassigned without explanation, and some of her patients were mysteriously transferred to other nurses. It was as if the entire system was closing ranks around Dr. Whitman, tightening the noose on those who dared to challenge him. But Alicia refused to back down. She and Sarah organized another meeting with the advocacy group, this time inviting more community leaders and activists. The turnout was even larger than before, and the atmosphere was charged with a sense of defiance. "We have to keep pushing," Alicia said as she addressed the crowd. "Dr. Whitman and his allies want to scare us into submission. They want us to believe we're powerless, but we're not. Together, we have a voice, and they can't silence all of us." The room erupted in applause, and Alicia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had momentum on their side, and despite the growing threats, she was more determined than ever to see this fight through. One evening, as Alicia returned to her apartment, she noticed something off. The door was slightly ajar. Her pulse quickened as she cautiously pushed it open, scanning the room for any signs of intrusion. Her living room appeared undisturbed, but when she stepped into her bedroom, she froze. Her dresser drawers had been pulled open, clothes tossed carelessly on the floor. Her papers, meticulously organized medical records and notes for their case, were scattered across her desk. But what sent a chill through her was the message scrawled in red marker on her mirror: "Stop, or else." Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to call Sarah. "Someone broke into my apartment," she said as soon as Sarah answered. "They left a message. It's bad, Sarah. They're escalating. Are you safe?" Sarah's voice was frantic. "I'm okay. I'm at home, but I need to leave. I can't stay here tonight. Come to my place, Sarah said quickly. You shouldn't be alone. Alicia packed a bag with essentials and hurried out the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The streets felt darker than usual, every shadow a potential threat. As she drove, her mind raced. This was beyond what she had imagined. They weren't just trying to intimidate her anymore. They were willing to cross a line. When she arrived at Sarah's apartment, they sat together in silence for a while, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Finally, Sarah spoke. We need to go public with this. The threats, the break-ins, it's all part of the same pattern. They're trying to silence us, and the only way to protect ourselves is to make sure everyone knows what's happening. Alicia nodded. You're right. If we stay quiet, they'll keep coming after us in the shadows. But if we bring this into the light, we make it impossible for them to act without consequences. Sarah finished. It's time. The following morning, Alicia and Sarah contacted a journalist who had been covering their story. They arranged for an interview, this time focusing on the retaliation they were facing. As they prepared to go on record, the weight of what they were about to do hung over them like a dark cloud. This could either save us or make things worse, Sarah said quietly as they waited in the lobby of the news station. We don't have a choice, Alicia replied, her voice steady. We can't let them control the narrative. We need to take control back. When the cameras started rolling, Alicia felt a strange calm wash over her. She recounted the events, the threats, the stalking, the break-in, with a sense of clarity that surprised even her. Sarah spoke next, her voice filled with quiet strength as she described the fear that had gripped them both over the past few weeks. As the interview aired that evening, the response was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage, and support poured in from unexpected places. Activist groups reached out, offering legal assistance and resources. Alicia felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning again, and this time, they weren't standing alone. But even as the public rallied behind them, Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of something dangerous. Dr. Whitman had been quiet since the break-in, and that silence felt more threatening than any of the overt actions he'd taken before. Late one night, Alicia's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unknown. You're playing a dangerous game. Be careful who you trust. Alicia stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. The message was cryptic, but its meaning was clear. Someone close to them, someone they had trusted, was feeding information to the other side. The battle they were fighting wasn't just against Dr. Whitman anymore. It was against an enemy that had infiltrated their very ranks.